Growly.
The Quarry is an interactive movie-like horror game where a group of camp counselors experience the supernatural while trapped at their camp when summer ends. The game is available for PC, PlayStation, and Xbox consoles.
Run!
Atmosphere. The atmosphere comes and goes based on the events of the game, with the prelude being pretty atmospheric before things calm down for the first 2 chapters, and then it rises again for the remainder of the game. There's tension and suspense from the story, but it doesn't go very deep thanks to the relationship with the characters. Initially I found this batch of characters a little irritating, but eventually grew to like them as the game went on, which made the latter half far more intense than the first half.
So, do you want to give me some direction on what we're looking for specifically?
Well, most of these cars look like they've already been stripped of parts, just empty frames and chassis, which doesn't help us much.
Okay, so we're looking for engines?
Well, anything relatively intact.
Got it.
It's a little inconsistent, with the game's greatest benefit being its greatest drawback, that it subverts expectations. Sometimes what could have been a frightening or sad moment would just randomly trail off with licensed music being played over shots of the river, which was often just confusing. The atmosphere seeped in certain character interactions, with tons of apprehension in the flashback sections during the mid-game, and the latter parts really nailing the apprehension with the number of important choices in the late game. The game doesn't intend for it to be overbearing, but the atmosphere is definitely there when it needs to be. That's one Harry Mason. Scares. The game relied heavily on jump scares, but they weren't many that really hit the mark with me. The quick time events were also very easy to complete, to the point where I only failed one in the entire game because I accidentally dropped my controller. There were some parts that felt like they would have benefited a DualShock 4 or 5 with the motion controls, like the part with Caitlin crawling across the beam to stay steady, which I think might have made some of these moments more intense than they were. Ultimately, there wasn't anything in the game that was really frightening, even when it was trying to be. That's still one Harry Mason. Sound design. The soundtrack is pretty diverse, but not much of it really benefits the horror. There are some great suspense pieces, but the licensed music interludes and almost romantic acoustic guitar melodies are good in the right place, but sometimes felt misplaced considering the things that were transpiring.
Take it all in, folks. That's the summer camp experience right there, and oh look, it seems somebody forgot to clear the place out. I guess one of the kids left their stuff, or maybe one of the guys back there? But I don't recognize this. Did you hear that? Looks like we have a choice on our hands. Do we snoop through someone else's belongings? Or do we open the spooky trapdoor and die a horrible, painful death? There are literally no right answers. Goodbye, cruel world. The final curtain is calling and there's no time for an encore.
There's lots of violins and eerie guitars to reinforce the deep south vibe, and they almost manage to be creepy. The chase music is pretty intense, and considering the instrumentation, it's quite a wide departure from everything else. The sound effects are pretty impressive, and I can't think of a single thing that didn't sound realistic. Even with noises happening in different rooms, the acoustics just worked like they would in real life, with characters becoming muffled as you left the room. The directional audio was also fantastic and worked perfectly. The voice acting was flawless, and even if some of the dialogue was cheesy, it's nothing to complain about since all of it matched the characters' personalities, even if it seemed weird. The characters themselves were often awkward and weird. Overall, the sound design was a little odd in places, but was pretty much immaculate, generally. That's 2 Harry Masons. Gore. Thanks to the pretty lifelike graphics, the blood looks very realistic when it shines in the moonlight. Depending on what choices you make though, you'll end up with different gory scenes. I saved quite a few of the characters and really only counted one truly gory scene, and it was quite the spectacle. There are explosive blood transformations for the game's enemies, and they look like something out of Bloodborne, which is pretty entertaining. Overall, the gore will vary based on your performance, but from what I saw, it was pretty impressive. That's 3 Harry Masons.
Well, I guess they don't put summer camps on maps. Have you seen any signs for it? Hey, eyes on the road!
Oh!
Story. The story begins with the camp counselors Max and Laura as they hit some kind of creature and run their car off the road. They encounter a police officer who's a little off, and after escaping from him, make it to Hackett's Quarry where they're working this summer. They encounter more than they bargained for in the basement, and then time jumps to the end of summer where the remainder of the counselors, unaware of where Laura and Max are, become trapped at Hackett's Quarry after a sabotaged van leaves them stranded. The story has its high points, but in the first few chapters it's mostly getting to know the characters with lots of awkward moments and unnecessary teen drama between the counselors that goes on for so long it's difficult to remember that you're playing a horror game. These aren't exactly bad, but some of the characters were difficult to like to begin with, and the sections are kinda slow. The mid and later game really make up for it though, with a flashback that adds so much to the story that even though I was initially against it, it turned out to be one of the best parts of the game. Interactions between the cop and Laura are done really well, and the choose your own adventure dialogue really felt like it made a difference here. The problem is that a lot of the choose your own adventure choices also made a lot more of the important moments feel abrupt, as the game skipped over parts a dead character would have been in, and some seemingly minor choices had unexpected important results, which is both a pro and a con. It did a pretty good job at subverting my expectations, and every time I thought I had the story figured out, it would go a different way, which was really engaging. But also some characters were introduced and then killed off a few scenes later, and some people seemed to be assigned more importance than was obvious in the story. The interludes with the fortune teller were abrupt and mysterious, and even with her own playable section, I felt like I didn't know her at all by the end of the game. The ending itself gave a brief section to talk about what became of the characters, but there wasn't much closure on the events, which was again a bit of a shame. Despite the problems, which may vary based on what choices you make, it was still a really engaging and quite fun ride that managed to subvert expectations time and time again, making the final score 4 out of 5 Harry Masons. I went into the Quarry not expecting much, but left pretty satisfied. The focus is more on the story this time, and it manages to tackle a cliche idea without becoming predictable. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion on horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I lost more characters than I wanted, I did not allow the curse to continue, and advise you don't either. There'll be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. And always go check out Bumps in the Middle of the Night. Peace.